Welcome to another episode of Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick, and as always, we like to talk about things related to resilience, business continuity, disasters, well-being, COVID, anything that's relatable to those topics, anything that helps you, your organization, or your community prepare for, respond to, and overcome adverse situations. If you'd like to be a guest on the show or you'd like to hear us talk about a specific topic, please feel free, reach out to LinkedIn. I am the only Alex Fullick on there, so I'm really easy to find. Send me a message and we'll see about getting you on the show. Quick reminder, a couple of conferences I'm speaking at later this year. October 4th to 6th, Minneapolis is the Continuity Insights Conference. November 3rd to 4th is BCI World Virtual. And December 1st to 2nd is the Continuity and Resilience Today Conference in Toronto. Hopefully, we'll be able to travel, but in a few weeks, I guess I'll find out if I'll be able to cross our border and visit some of these places. Fingers crossed. Today is part 2 of a conversation I had with today's guest a couple of weeks ago on the topic of risk and resilience, discussing the hard stuff. So I'd like to welcome back again for his fourth appearance, Dr. Gavriel Schneider. Gav, welcome back.
Thanks, Alex. Great to have the opportunity to continue our robust discussion.
Yes, of what we thought was going to be a quick one, and here we are with a part 2. and just so you're aware, every single time you've appeared on the show, we've gone over time, and we've had to split it into 2 shows. So just shows how good of a chat we always have.
Looking forward to it.
So, first of all, you're okay, right? You're doing okay down in Australia with current situations?
Yeah, I think, we chatted 2 weeks ago, and it's interesting. We're in lockdown at the moment again, and it does seem to be an ongoing conundrum at this stage. And I think it's one of those pieces. We are probably at the point, and I know we've probably touched on this before, I'm sure many of the other listeners have, where I think the consequences of lockdown are starting to outweigh the benefits in a very significant way again.
Yeah.
And I think this round, particularly just with the Australian hat on, the last few rounds, there's been government subsidies to businesses that have helped. This round there isn't. And I think there's going to be a slaughterhouse when we come out the other side.
Yes, I think the same thing's going to happen here. I just thought I'd better ask because things have been moving so fast in the last 2 weeks all around the world. So I just want to make sure you and your family and colleagues are doing well.
Thank you. We're all good.
Good. Now, we talked about risk and resilience, discussing the hard stuff. Hopefully, you've got a great memory. Can you kind of give us a recap on last week's show before we move into the couple of points that we didn't have time to get to?
As me and you semi-jokingly started our conversation that we would need another 4 hours just to get through some of the meat that we covered. But I think the core thing was really looking at, the way humans think and make decisions as individuals then becomes a collective thing. And, basically organizations have this almost collective myopia, as it's often referred to, where they focus on things that are of interest or they perceive can harm them, but then they ignore some of the blatantly obvious ones. And this tends to build up over time. The other variable we discussed is this focus on managerialism versus leadership instead of managerialism and leadership. And that most of the, let's say, established organizations in the modern business age have been built on principles that are 300-400 years old and are not necessarily serving us really well in this volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous operating environment.
Very true. At the end of our segment, our first part, I should say, you had started to mention leadership and courage, which is where we're going to start today. So can you talk about, what is it? Why is courage and leadership important in risk and resilience?
All right, big topic, and I'm glad we have a bit of time to explore it. So I think let's start with looking at the segue that answers your question, which is if our systems that we set up were perfect, we actually wouldn't need leadership skills at all. We would just need management. And we wouldn't need people to be courageous. In other words, do something that is hard to do, maybe not popular, or maybe potentially even against the rules that their organization has established. So realistically, if it wasn't for the fact that we've become so hyper-focused on this perception that we can control everything, and at an organizational level, we build these governance systems and these compliance regimes that are in their own way often so onerous to comply with that most of the time people have to work around them to get stuff done. And the problem with that, by definition, is if I have to work around something to get it done, I actually am breaking the rules, which means it's in essence not necessarily good for compliance reasons, or for lack of a better descriptor, towing the party line. But what you find more and more in this VUCA world, as we said, that volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, is to get stuff done, we either have to break rules or we have to take that long, difficult route of trying to get rules changed so that we can benefit. And, COVID is a really good example of that. And I'm going to use Australia as just the case example. I'm originally South African, but we can even use those two comparisons later. But realistically, to get a law passed to change any sort of legislation, normally takes years. When COVID kicked in last year, within 3 days, certain things have been changed and amended. So I think one of the challenges we've got is that it's so much easier just to follow the guidelines or follow the rules, tick the box, and do the bare minimum I need to meet my KPIs. Or, for example, in an organizational context, it's much easier to do things like lay people off or, maneuver the numbers so we look profitable. And we see this even at a societal level. And I know a lot of your listeners may work for government organizations and are thinking, well, my organization's business is societal well-being or societal safety or recovery from some sort of disruptive event. The challenge we've got is usually those organizations are even harder to change because their rules are even more established and have been in place for longer. So in a nutshell, to start exploring why leadership and courage are so important in the modern era is that we've come out of really 300 years where they haven't been. The focus has been on managerialism, process centrism, and setting up systems that in essence are not human dependent. We've been focusing so much on building.
What do you mean by human dependent?
Great question. So the ultimate aim, and I'm going to go back, I'm not that old, but when I started studying management, what was it? That would have been 24, 25 years ago. We learned the basics of management: planning, organizing, leading, and controlling was what we were taught. Leading was one of 4 variables you use to achieve an output. And sometimes when people hear me talk about this, they go, "Oh, Gav, you're anti-management." I'm not. I'm a huge fan of management because without management, we can't achieve consistency or scale. What I am against is trying to take principles that are designed for, let's say, universal application, and then apply them to scenarios where they don't work. So in essence, a lot of the systems we used have not taken into effect or into account the way humans make decisions, how we motivate humans, how they perform under stress or duress, and it's simply put what engages them to want to perform for us. So while these are not new topics, they've been in discussion probably, let's say, since the 1950s or 1960s. These have been popular HR topics, but we still see them described as soft skills or bolt-on pieces, as opposed to, hey, hold on, when things go totally wrong, it's not my software program that saves me, nor is it my governance system. It's usually people with a certain skill set, who are able to function under pressure, put complex concepts into some sort of pattern, and then help navigate our way out of what seems to be an unnavigatable minefield.
Yeah.
And so to answer your question directly, that human enablement or the human centricity piece has actually, even though it gets a lot of airtime, it doesn't actually get a lot of output or traction in a lot of organizations. And there's numerous reasons for that, which I'm sure we'll explore shortly. Does that answer the question? Because I'm aware that your listeners would probably want clarity on that too.
Yeah, I've said that before, that when it comes to resilience and business continuity, to put all these processes in place, to protect people and help our people, but it ends up being a lot of lip service, because at the end of the day, it's not all these processes that get followed. It comes right back to the people, and yet we don't incorporate people into our processes. So we end up with this weird kind of loop that we get stuck in. Many organizations get stuck in. People are our greatest asset. But what's the first thing that happens when there's any kind of situation? You cut the training for people. You get rid of people. You change people's jobs. You do all these negative things against your people. So is people really your key focus? And
oh man, I just love the way you describe that, because it's really important. And I'm going to give you a few examples. I'm not going to name any clients, but as you know, we run a pretty broad consulting practice, and we also have a training business. And how many times I've consulted for large organizations or government departments, and you look at their core values, and there's always things like people, well-being, performance, courage, integrity, all these buzzwords, which
buzzwords. Exactly.
100%. Then you pull down and you actually get onto the ground and you start talking about these things with people who work at the organization. And most of the time they go, don't even know what those are. Don't even know what those mean. Or you look at organizations when they look at their, for example, top 3 priorities. Okay. And even when you look at, for example, risk management as a discipline, you'll very rarely see human performance or human enablement as a risk or opportunity, but you will see things like compliance or conduct risk, cybersecurity, funding, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. So part of the challenge we've got with this stuff is it's tough to change. And, COVID is actually a unique opportunity for us to change, because we've all been disrupted and we've all felt that, the outdated methodologies don't necessarily work in all contexts. So if it's okay, I might, just for your listeners, because I know you've got a pretty broad base of people that come from lots of different backgrounds, it's worth just understanding a little bit of 2 academic theories. The one is complex adaptive systems theory, which I know you're no stranger to, and the other is chaos theory. And I'm not going to go into detail on them.
I haven't heard that one in a long time.
But, this is the catch, right? People always go, why human enablement? Why human centricity? Can't I just buy a software program? Can't I just come up with a plan and put it in a folder, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, to manage whatever the risk variable we're talking about? And we almost see this every single time a natural disaster manifests, whatever it is. Things very rarely go to plan. And I'm going to quote Tony McGurk, who, if any of your listeners don't know Tony was the fire chief of Merseyside in the UK, and he's actually written up in The Economist for taking what was the worst performing fire department in the UK and turning it into the best performing fire department. Oh. And it's a really interesting case study. So Tony worked a lot with me in trying to get this idea of presilience out. And one of the things that really struck me, and I've asked Tony a few times to talk about his journey of change, a government bureaucrat who had to take realistically an underfunded, underperforming department and try and turn it around. And when he really shares the processes he went through to do that were very tough. He had death threats, they tried to burn his house down. There were a whole bunch of things where oppositional people were going, hey, you can't change stuff. So I think this is the conundrum, right? We often think about these things, and it's good that we think about them organizationally or societally, but I like to look at these building blocks of self or individual, team or group, organization, and then societal. And I call them the 4 layers. And if we only fixate on, let's say, the organizational, which in the description I just provided is layer 3, we then get really frustrated why stuff doesn't work. Same thing, I can only imagine the frustration of some of our policymakers at government level who are going, everybody just stay home and go get vaccinated. 2 simple things will be out of this problem. And then you look at all the myriad of problems that manifest in trying to implement those 2
comparatively simple, objective, focused pieces. And so part of the challenge is not new, right? It's a conundrum for almost anybody who's had to try and drive a change or implement something in a democratic methodology or way of doing business. And most of your listeners, I'm sure, are in first world countries that have, democratic underpinning characteristics.
Mm-hmm.
It's harder to get change going with that than it is in other organizations, in other societies.
You got me thinking. I want to say before I lose it. Is it because too often we look at change, trying to push change outward? Because how we started with courage is to get change implemented correctly and people behind that change. You actually have to look inside first, the courage part, to make a change yourself so that you can be the change. Does that make sense?
Half far through the screen. It's so blatantly simple, yet it's the part that's ignored by almost all organizations because they are still focused on this idea that all I want to do is give people who work for me the small layer of technical skills they need to do the job I've hired them to do. Where in managing disruption, the job you have to do, how you have to do it changes often. And in reality, it's normally the skill sets that we talk about in our field, often, things like adaptability, resilience or presilience or innovation or even leadership, comes up a lot. But realistically, we're not investing in our people to build those skills. And I'll give you a few examples. And I think it's important for us to make sure we also, caveat this a little. So first and foremost, not everybody is built to be the star during disruption.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really hard for organizations,
despite their title.
So, you've given me the perfect segue. So this is the challenge, right? In many cases, people have climbed hierarchical ladders based on excellent management skills, right? So their ability to organize limited resources, prioritize them, and ensure they operate according to a set methodology is usually what enables them to climb the ladder. Mm-hmm. So in other words, they do that well, they don't make that many mistakes, or they cover their mistakes up, or they have someone else to blame. And we can go into the corporate sociopath and psychopath as a case example, because that system actually enabled people with, those sort of psychological, and they might not be disorders, they might just be tendencies or leanings. So we're not just saying because somebody's climbed the ladder they are a sociopath, but the challenge we've got is, by definition, somebody who really doesn't care about what other people think about them is going to do better at trampling other people as they prove that they're great and others aren't in climbing the ladder. So a lot of times people have climbed the ladder because of technical skills or those sort of innate behavioral characteristics. What we need in disruption are people that are almost the opposite, right? We don't want narcissists. We don't want people who don't care about other people. We want people who are able to stay calm and not get hyperadrenalized. We want people who are able to empathize and understand what others may be going through, even if they're thousands of miles or kilometers away. Mm-hmm. And, it has no impact on people sitting in a crisis room or, coordinating things remotely. But they need to empathize, right? Mm-hmm. So this is part of that conundrum. Not everyone is built for that. Yet what we tend to keep doing is putting people that have the title chief executive, chief operating officer, senior manager, director, you name it, onto our incident or emergency or crisis response teams without actually assessing, firstly, how do they respond under pressure? Mm-hmm. Secondly, do they actually have some of those leadership characteristics we just described? And thirdly, this is the biggest one that I'm sure you've seen this many times. It blows my mind when we consult and we find out how many of these senior executives don't want to be on crisis teams, hate the idea of being on call, mm-hmm. and, feel that their skill set can't add value anyway, yet, to be in that title, whatever the position is, they must either be the head of the crisis management team or whatever it is. So it's not popular. And I'll give you one example. We just finished quite a big project and we really requested the client to do a basic psychometric evaluation on their people before we started to train them. And we're told, no, that won't go down well. It's not popular, and we can't tell people that they're not able to do something. So, it's kind of interesting, because all we do then is we set people up for failure, and we set our systems up to not work. And this is where I think, we started the conversation with the idea of courage. And I think we'll circle back many times to courage and leadership, because we haven't really started exploring the leadership traits and why being courageous is important. But in essence, really what we have to be able to do is start with the self, okay, as you described, and understand what you're good at and what you're not in an open and honest manner. Now, if we think of, basic business continuity principles, obviously we simply go, what is, a critical success point? What's a critical failure point? And let's make sure, we strengthen the critical failure points and leverage off the critical success factors. Most people, even if they haven't been trained in our fields, logically deduce that makes sense. The challenge often is those critical hinge points are actually people. They're not necessarily a mechanized or automated AI that will solve the problem for them.
They're not things to use.
Correct. And this is the other challenge. Not in every case are they also things that, running a crisis exercise once a year will ensure that they are trained and ready to be able to respond to whatever we throw at them. And it's interesting to see what sort of solutions organizations then lean on when they come to this realization. And ironically, instead of actually following a logical flow, which says, let's vet our people for their success and ours. Okay, let's determine who the best of our people are to deal with disruption, crisis, etc. And let's invest in those. What we do is we skip that step, and then we get fixated with over planning. So we go, and literally we've got a client who, at the moment, we're trying to talk them out of doing this. One of the things we did a COVID incident response review for them. And one of the things that was being pushed by their disaster recovery lead was, let's hire 2 people and have them put plans together for every conceivable disruptive event that would trigger a business continuity requirement.
Do they really understand how many that could be?
Pause. I was waiting for your response there, because by definition, it's impossible, right?
Yeah.
You into perpetuity would be coming up with a plan, reviewing a plan, and in reality, I'll quote Tony McGurk again. He's on my mind today. Clearly, one of the things I always like he says is, nobody ever told the fire what your plan expected of it.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
And so realistically for us, this fixation with over planning lends itself back to this illusion of control. We perceive because we've got a plan, we now have control. In reality, we are far better placed. And, there are lots of places who have done this well, to look at, for example, what the military does with their special forces. Special forces people are, they are very carefully selected. Mm-hmm. They are exceptionally well trained. And most of that training is not just the technical skills that they're required to do for their job. It's how to be adaptive, resilient, and overcome situations that may seem overwhelming.
Yeah.
And this is kind of the interesting piece, because, conventional militaries have realized that without that core group, it's very hard to get stuff done in a manner that's easy and effective.
Yes.
So this is part of that challenge that I would put back to organizations now, is to say, we actually have blueprints in many other sectors of how this stuff can work well. The challenge we've got is most organizations are not in the luxurious position that most military type organizations are in. And when I say that, military type organizations spend 95% of their time training and preparing, and 5% of their time realistically doing stuff. Mm-hmm. Most businesses or organizations spend 99% of their time doing stuff with 1% of training, if they're lucky. So we're never going to be able to cut and paste that model as it is. There's no budget, there's no time to do that. No organization in the modern operating context has enough spare money lying around just to have, a backup response team for any issue that goes wrong.
Yeah, that would be nice, but unfortunately, there just aren't even the number of people to be able to do that.
100%. And one of the things we find often, and I always start my consulting discussions with something along the lines of, do you feel you are in the environment or operating context where you're under pressure to do more with less quicker? And almost everybody goes, oh yeah, that's my life at the moment, or that's my job.
Every day.
100%. So then our challenge is, if you're under pressure to do more with less quicker, we need to be smarter in the way we build these capabilities and skill sets into our organizations, our people, not have them as the standalone, piece of work that we have to do, we don't want to do. And very often these things go to HR. Human resources becomes the go-to for capability development around things like resilience, adaptability, mental health and well-being. And somebody said to me the other day, is a very experienced HR executive, said to me, and I'm only quoting his stats, so for your academic listeners, I apologize if it's inaccurate, but he said to me something along the lines that roughly 95% of HR practitioners and executives have not been trained in leadership at all, nor have they been trained in soft skills development. So this is really interesting. So we're asking people who head up process-driven functions, and HR is one of those fields. My heart always goes out to them, because usually people get involved with HR because they like working with people, and then find out that they spend most of their time doing paperwork, firing people, doing disciplinary hearings, and slowly getting the will to live sucked out of them. And every now and again they might get this chance to do some sort of capability uplift. So I think one of the challenges we've got is this perception of who owns these core skill development pieces. So if, let's say today we're talking about two core skills, leadership and courage, which are not necessarily the same things, and it's really important for us to differentiate those later. You start that discussion with who owns it in an organization, or let's go bigger, let's go to stage 4, who owns it in society. So if we look at it from a societal perspective, we often go, hey, that should sit with our leaders. Our leaders, our nominated political representatives, our senior bureaucrats. But most of those people got to their position not because they were courageous or showed exceptional leadership traits. They got there the same as corporate executives. They managed to keep their nose clean, not get blamed for stuff, have a few wins, and, basically position themselves that they're a low risk, safe option.
Yeah. Worked for a few of those people.
Ditto. so part of the challenge too is it's not their fault. We're so quick to blame these people who are in these leadership positions, but if you look at most of the schools that people go to, for example, bureaucratic leadership training, most of that training is managerialism centric, and they're taught to organize, they're taught to manage people on KPIs, etc., etc. They're not really taught, look deep, understand yourself, build your own ability to overcome hardship, understand how you tick so that you can be an exemplar for those around you. So
that takes courage. That takes courage, because a lot of people don't like, how do I put this? Don't like what they see in the mirror when they really pull the layers back.
Man, I love these conversations because you've just nailed it, right? This is part of that challenge. And there's been so much work done on this idea of authentic leadership. The problem we've got is we're in a stage of, let's call it human evolution, or maybe through COVID devolution, depends on your perspective. But realistically, part of the challenge we've got is, if I can't actually accept myself, okay, and then have this attitude of continuous improvement on me, then how am I going to do that in a team or group or organizational society? And it's really interesting. One of the best parts of, I guess, my job is I often get to talk to really smart people. And I was on a panel on a conference not too long ago with a bunch of really smart people talking about societal breakdown, highlighting historical civilizations and their resilience and why potentially they, eroded and don't exist anymore. And there were these insanely accurate negative observations of our modern societies, ranging from urban sprawl to pollution to global warming. This was, not even climbing into the way we've tackled COVID. And all of them were like, we're in trouble. For example, the way we've built our cities is not sustainable, just as one example. And as I kept listening to them, there was no real, but what can I do about it now? What could you or I do about this that will make it better for our kids?
Mm-hmm.
And this is the piece that's sort of become, to a lesser or greater degree, my primary focus on trying to link, let's call it personal resilience and presilience, with organizational resilience and resilience. I'm staying away at this moment, at this stage, with not climbing straight into the societal piece too much, because I think it's sequential. If you can't do it for you and I can't do it for us, and that us might just be my family, it might not even be my work colleagues or my team, then how am I going to do it for my organization? If I can't even do it for my organization, how are we going to do it for our societies?
Yep. I think that's a perfect spot for us to take a break. We are talking about risk and resilience. We're discussing the hard parts, and we are talking with Dr. Gavriel Schneider, and we'll be right back. I hope you've enjoyed the chat with Dr. Gavriel Schneider. We spoke so much in this segment that what you just heard was part one. Check at the end of this video for a link to part two. If you liked that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave a message and let me know what your thoughts are. If you'd like to be a guest on the show to talk about something related to business continuity, disaster management, COVID, personal well-being, anything that's relatable to those subjects, you can reach me through my LinkedIn profile, which is in the video description. And of course, don't forget to subscribe. In the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.